Hey there, and welcome to Thirsty Thursday. This is the 4 p.m. Report Aftershow. And for a brief while, we fancied ourselves live video people. And we were over on Instagram doing this. But since then, Zuckerberg's empire has been imploding a little bit. And while many people remember to hate on Facebook, I don't think enough people remember that Instagram belongs to them as well. So we therefore said we'll take our little stance on this, and we're moving it over here. So maybe we launch straight into it, Will, with the Facebook implosion. And welcome to Rohini Mukherji. We are starting our little guest, interaction on this platform, and we invited her because we love her take on the news and gossip in the marketing world. She's definitely one of our trusted sources.
And she has one of the best voices I've heard in a long time.
This is true.
Yes.
So welcome to Thursday.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, now Rohini, I'd love to get your take on this too. So, the Facebook stuff hit. All these big Fortune 500 brands have been joining this boycott, or saying various things like we'll pause our marketing for a month, or we're going to do it forever. And that's cool and that's great, but they're fed up with Facebook not censoring hate speech and doing all that shit with our privacy and all those kind of issues. But the thing Susan and I were talking about this week was, what about the small to medium-sized businesses that rely so heavily on Facebook and Instagram because of the ability to target that niche they want to target? It's a lot cheaper to advertise on these channels than the traditional way people advertise, and it's a huge source of business, Facebook and Instagram. So we've had things to say. We talked about a little checklist on, like, do you want to take a stance right now? Answer these 5 questions. We did a video on that earlier in the week. I'm wondering, Rohini, what, because you have clients that are on the medium to smaller size too, what kind of things are you guys saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really does run the gamut. I think on the larger end, even with SME, on the larger end, as well as obviously the big brands, it's a little bit easier to take that stance because your funnel has a lot of prongs, and you do have revenue coming in from different places. I think small to medium enterprises, and we actually had this conversation earlier this week, one of the interesting sort of concepts that has a little bit of a sort of dual meaning is this notion of community. So on one hand, these brands absolutely stand for the censoring of hate speech, and certainly free speech when it comes to inclusion and diversity. But on the other hand, their community is also the people they serve. So to your point, Will, part of what it does with this sort of more cost-efficient targeting is it also feeds their revenue in order to serve sometimes patients, sometimes clients, and to provide livelihood. So, it is a dual responsibility to the greater public, but also to their own immediate constituents, their employees, their customers, their patients. And I think it is tough balancing that. And, does taking your ad spend out for July really make that strong a statement in terms of the follow through, and what size of company can afford to do that, zero-sum game?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's, we're constantly talking about meeting your audience where they're at, right? As marketers and communicators. And if the audience is at Facebook, then there is a responsibility with that. But also I wanted to touch on the fact that what is taking a stance mean? It's not jumping on a bandwagon. It's like, what would you like to see change in order for you to either embrace this again, or, permanently remove it from your roster, or whatever it is. And we've been sort of like seeing things in the news, obviously, where it's like on Friday last week, they made a statement, and through this week, they've dug their heels in. Yeah. And said that we said what we needed to say on Friday. And I believe there was a New York Times article which compared Zuckerberg's reaction to a toddler who expects praise because, like, look, I put the dishes away. Like,
yeah, it's like, ooh, big deal. You put the dishes away. That's what you should be doing, right? So regarding the hate speech, you should be censoring that. Like, this isn't something you should be proud of. And Zuckerberg's team met with some of the big executives on Tuesday, I think, and there was nothing else said or no other measures announced. It was kind of like, we said what we said on Friday. And there's been some people saying that Zuckerberg himself is saying that, nope, you don't give in to people when they bully you or things like that, right? So it'll be interesting to see if Facebook does say anything or do anything more, or if they're just going to dig their heels in because they know they can ride this out.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how they play this one. I mean, I think they have the opportunity to really step up and sort of show what inclusive leadership and leadership that listens to its constituents means.
Yeah.
See how they take that opportunity.
And balance that with, let's be fair to Zuckerberg, balance that with his obsessive free speech commitment. That's what Facebook is all about, is like, I am all about this free speech, even if the free speech is hate speech, but that's where the line lies.
Right. Yeah.
I don't think it's as okay as it is before. But yeah, there were a couple of other topics. So that is obviously top of everyone's mind. But there were a couple of other things we wanted to talk about. And I know that Rohini we'd like to ask our guests to bring something to the table to, let's call it rant,
Yeah.
to rant out as well. And we'll get to that in a minute. But the other story that's been circulating on the interwebs the last couple of weeks and heating up this week has been the F1, if anyone follows the racing world, and the fact that the only real person of color driver on the F1 circuits is Lewis Hamilton. And he's been using his voice to sort of bring a bit more awareness to it. And what I found, like, if we call it too thirsty on the interwebs, what we found too thirsty was the responses to that. Like when Lewis Hamilton was like, we're going to set a commission into place to try and build a little bit more, give opportunities to more drivers like him, because he does come from like absolute rags to riches, right? That's his story. Oh, by the way, this is called Thirsty Thursday because we day drink.
Crap, I don't have a drink. Oh, wow.
Somewhere. So I thought it was cool, but the general response to it was, oh, shut up and play the sport. Look at the NBA. There's no diversity there either. So, we wanted to talk to you a little bit about that and be like, how do you deal with that? This is the all lives matter problem, isn't it? It's like Black Lives Matter, well, all lives matter.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think there's also something to be said around tokenism as a way to suddenly make this not my problem.
Right.
I think the problem is that some companies, I've seen responses saying, we don't have that issue because we have a person of color in a senior position.
Right.
What do you have? Right? Is Netflix going to say it no longer has a diversity issue because they've just hired, a power Black woman as the CMO? No, that's an absolutely amazing move, but she is incredible in and of herself.
Yeah.
From her racial background, it's, she is a very accomplished person and would be a coup for any company to hire.
Yeah.
That's not symptomatic of there not being a diversity issue.
Right.
And I think that's what's happening in some cases. I see it in the corporate world. We look at all the Bon Appetits of the world that are folding at the leadership stance, and a lot of them are using the sort of cop out, but we do have a couple of diverse people, so that's not us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so true. It's so true. It's definitely going back to that. Even Nike, who takes such a strong stance and shows up in the front of all of the messaging, has 3% of their top leadership who are people of color. So that tokenism versus actual, real, meaningful change continues.
Yeah. And it needs to start at it needs to come from the top down, and it needs to be at that entry level where we were talking about why do they complain that the fashion world of New York is run by rich white girls and gay men? It's because their parents could afford to pay for them to live in Manhattan and do that free internship, because when you work at Purple Magazine, you don't get paid. You know what I mean? So they could spend $5,000 a month on rent and live that Manhattan life because they had that support. And so therefore they get to rise in the ranks of that industry. So it's companies thinking on all levels, how can we make sure that people have the same opportunities to advance?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing too is that it needs to become, it's not about charity. It's not about give an entry level opportunity to somebody of color so you can check a box.
Right.
Yeah.
How do you make rising through the ranks a bit more conducive and level the playing field there?
Exactly.
Yeah. Equity versus just like token diversity, right?
You got it. Yeah.
They don't need help. Black, Indigenous, people of color do not need help. We don't need a charity. It's more, we need the opportunity. So rethink your chemistry test as the last part of an HR interview process. Because really what that often is code for is, are we alike?
Yep.
And sometimes that's not just stifling, that's actually a disadvantage.
Yeah. And there's so many layers to this like privilege discussion, as we've discovered in the last couple of months. And I think it really all comes back down to one thing, which I'm pretty unforgiving about: educate yourself. Like, you know, don't depend on me to tell you what you should know. Don't ask me your dumb questions. Google it. So there's a friend of ours, actually, a client, who does this thing, which is super cool. If anyone asks her a dumb question, she takes a GIF of herself Googling it, and then she sends it to them. It's my favorite thing in the world.
Do we want to move on to talk about our...
I want to say one more thing in this space.
Sure.
So I discovered today that Karen has competition.
Oh, right.
So Karen, I mean, while I hate that term, it has been rife, right? It's all over the place. I don't think it's any better than, you know, coming up with derogatory names for people of color. Karen's not my favorite. But I discovered this morning that there is male Karen, and male Karen is now Brad. And Brad's definition is he spends an inordinate amount of time to invalidate your theories.
That's funny.
I love that.
Oh, sorry, all the Brads out there.
It's kind of sad that these names are becoming a thing, but it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, to move on now, Rohini, tell us
what's irking you, or what's a pet peeve that
what's
you're
too
having?
thirsty on the interwebs.
So it's funny that you just talked about education and the responsibility to educate yourself, because I read an article today that really impacted me. It's from Eater, and it's written by a food writer named Nayantara Datta. And she was talking about reclaiming Indian food or Indian culture to some extent from the white gaze. And the premise of the article is, you know, a lot of these foods that when we were growing up were perhaps, you know, a little bit embarrassing because of the strong smell, or, you know, the
garlic.
Right? And the things that, you know, like she talked about how like tempering mustard seeds would set off the fire alarm and would immediately alert, like, it's like, alert, alert, there's an Indian person who lives on, you know, and all of that, which were sources of embarrassment, have suddenly transcended into being cool now that they've been goopized or somehow endorsed by white people. Sort of mainstream culture. Don't think it's necessarily white, but now that it's sort of common parlance in Western culture, suddenly it's cool. Turmeric is cool. Ghee is a superfood. These are things we grew up with, and to some extent were embarrassed of. You know, you would see turmeric stains, they were very telling. And so I really like the perspective that she had of, you know, it's important to educate yourself. It's also really fun to educate yourself on other cuisines, but it's important to respect where they came from, the source of where that came from. Turmeric did not come from Gwyneth Paltrow. And, you know, and I think that is something that, you know, it's almost like you have permission to bring it into mainstream culture when it gets a certain endorsement. But it's important to recognize and validate, you know, where the source and origins of those things are. So one thing I would like to sort of say as my key takeaway: do not ever say chai tea. No, chai tea. Chai means tea.
Yeah, don't say chai tea. Chai tea latte probably irritates me slightly more than just chai tea. And we all have our trigger words, right? I mean, for me, it's chicken tikka. I'm vegetarian by choice. Most people who know me know that. And if you keep asking me for my preference of chicken tikka masala, it pisses me off. And I love that these, like, we've talked about this on multiple levels. I love that it's mainstream. I love that everybody knows about the food that embarrassed me when I was growing up. But there's a line between, again, it's all the line, right? There's a line between fame and popularity and appropriation.
Yeah, and also, like you said, like, understanding where it comes from. Like, you know, it's not like, ooh, I've just learned about this great new spice called turmeric from Gwyneth, as opposed to, you know, it being presented from Gwyneth as in, like, this has been used in Indian cuisine for years. It's the way it's done, I think, is what's irksome. Yeah.
So true. So there you go. This week in marketing thirst, whether good or bad, are the Facebook tales of what's going on out there and what taking a stance looks like. What does, inclusivity look like on things like F1, and where does that discussion lead us? And go look up Brad. As well, food.
Yeah.
Food is the greatest sort of uniter on so many levels. So have a think about that. Quickly, because we call this the 4 p.m. Report After Show. This week, again, we stayed in the inclusivity space for our podcast. Would you like to tell people quickly about what we talked about?
We had Dale McDermott on, who's the Chief Operating Officer of the Canada's LGBTQ plus Chamber of Commerce. And he was on talking about a report that they just issued in conjunction with the federal government about the LGBTQ plus traveler profile, who they are, what they spend, what are their worries and fears and pain points and all of that sort of stuff. And the reason that this is appropriate now is this is an opportunity for an industry that was hit super hard, the hospitality tourism industry here in Canada, to go after a traveler who, according to Dale and his report, is they're the first to want to travel again after this pandemic. They're more adventurous. They spend more on their trips. So it's kind of a shout out to all of these small local tourist and hospitality businesses across the province and Canada to maybe make sure your marketing materials, the way you're talking and messaging is inclusive. So you're not going to miss out on this particular type of traveler who is eager to go and do something right now and leave their house. Yeah. It's a great episode. It was really good. So if you haven't listened to the episode, you can check that out. And
thank you for joining us, Rohini. We can always depend on you to have wise words to say in the inclusivity space. So this is not going to be the last time that people are hearing from you on our profiles.
Great. Wise, unminced words on my jam.
Yeah.
Unminced, important.
Unminced. I love it.
I love it. That's going to be the word of the week. All right. Thank you. And bye. Hold on a second.